welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Nancy Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Hello, everybody. In this episode of Digital Agency Real Talk, we're going to be talking about a topic that is, well, close to my heart personally. I know if there are any people who know me on a personal level who are listening to this, they're going to be like, oh yeah, decision fatigue. So yes, the topic we're going to be discussing today is decision fatigue. So as usual, we're going to be digging into why this topic, why now. We're going to talk a little bit around what is the context around it, what are some of the things we hear all the time about dealing with it, and how has that worked for us or for me, and dig quite a bit further into how to combat it in a real way. So super stoked to have you here with me today to discuss decision fatigue.
I'm super stoked too. I wish decision fatigue wasn't even a thing, but it's something we all face, even if we don't think we do. So I think it's really important to talk about.
Awesome. So Celene, what is decision fatigue anyway?
So basically at its core, you, me, everyone ever faces a million decisions a day. Whether it be to, walk or bike or drive somewhere, or if you're at the grocery store to get, the whole wheat pasta or the white pasta, whatever it is. In business, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you're constantly making decisions all day long, especially if you have other people coming to you with questions and all these decisions piling onto you. And basically, your brain just gets exhausted from making decisions and you get stressed out. You stop making good decisions or you delay them, and it causes a lot of problems.
Yes, absolutely. This is something, a lot of us can relate to, maybe struggling to make decisions. I think that a big joke that we hear a lot of when it comes to relationships is, picking what you're going to have for dinner, or picking what movie you're going to see or something like that, being one of the biggest challenges that healthy relationships face, even when they're healthy. And I can definitely relate to that. I'm somebody who has struggled with decisions ever since I was a kid. That being said, though, having trouble deciding what to eat at night, it's related to this, but it's not exactly the same thing. Decision fatigue is really... the way I've heard it described is that your capacity to make decisions, especially good decisions, decisions that move you further towards your goals, is actually a finite resource. I believe this is from the book, The One Thing by Gary, I'm having a brain fart on his last name, but a book many of you are probably familiar with. The idea is that at the beginning of the day, the decisions that you have to make are going to be better, come faster, and be a lot easier overall than after you've made more and more decisions throughout the day. That becomes more and more challenging. And if I remember correctly, one kind of more data-driven example that they gave is that and I don't have this in front of me, so if you do have the specific details and stuff and want to share it with us, please do. But one of the things that they discuss, one of the things that this study looked at was people's capacity to choose a healthy snack versus a candy snack. And basically what they found is that even just over the course of a few hours, people's capacity to choose, say, the healthy snack over the, sweet or unhealthy snack, even knowing that one or the other would kind of help them or hurt them more, sharply declined actually just before a break, and just after a break, it went up again, basically. So this is like a small version of this, but really over the course of the day, basically your capacity to make decisions is a finite resource that gets continually depleted.
Yeah, and I actually just read a study that's kind of the small example. On a big example that affects many lives is they did a psychological study on judges, and they monitored judges' rulings, whether or not they parole someone. And they found that in the morning, parolees or people up for parole were way more likely to get a favorable ruling than, same thing. As it goes down towards lunch, the likelihood of getting parole just plummets, and then after lunch goes up again and then continues to drop throughout the day. And they kind of attributed it to because change is a bigger decision than not change. It's easier to keep them in jail. It's less of a decision. It's less stressful on their brains. But yeah, that's kind of the other end of the spectrum for that exact same phenomenon.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And my own personal story that I was sharing with you, Celene, is that actually when I was in university, I was in this program. It was called, I was at the University of British Columbia, and it was called Arts One. And it was meant to be this big program that wrapped up some history and geography and literature all up in one. And basically, it consisted of reading a book every week, a major work of literature every week, and writing an essay on it every 2 weeks, breaking up into peer groups of 4 or 5, and then meeting with the professor for kind of an in-depth one-on-one, or, maybe not one-on-one, but small group experience. And this thing was touted as being so amazing and so incredible because, you're getting all of this like personalized time and all this different type of stuff. But basically, over the course of 2 weeks, there was like a pod that met every day. And my first semester, I was the very last pod to meet. So that meant that we were always meeting on a Friday near the end of the day. It was me and 4 other people. And no matter how good of a mark I might get from the other people, my peers who were marking me, and no matter how hard I tried, I was always a really strong student. It was a huge shock the first time I wrote an essay and got like a 60%. Which was my very first essay that I wrote for this program. And I was like, what? And I was honestly, I tried to brush it off and stuff, but inside I was like, oh. And every single 2 weeks, I would try and I would listen to all the feedback, and I would do harder and do better and work harder. And no matter what I did, I could not top basically a 68 or 70. And after, this was a full year course. And in the beginning of the second semester, just logistically, unfortunately, I had to switch pods. So I wasn't with all the people that I'd been with, and I was afraid that, it was going to negatively impact things. But the difference was that now I was like the second pod to meet instead of like the 10th pod to meet or something. And immediately, that very first essay, my mark jumped like 10% or something like that. It was great, but I'll be honest, it was extremely frustrating, even that, because I was like, I worked so hard and basically just gave up. And now my mark is suddenly so much better. But I'll tell you, the professor's whole demeanor changed on that Friday versus on that Tuesday, from basically kind of looking bored and tired and like she was just kind of barely keeping it together to actually being engaged. Now, at the time, I felt understandably a little bit mad at her. But even then, before I had heard anything, I'm fresh-faced, like 18 years old, have no idea what's going on in life, basically. That was at least me at 18. And even then, I could see what a difference it made. Now, at the time, I just correlated it with tiredness. But if this isn't something that you think is important, hopefully these 2 stories can kind of shake that a little bit for you, because holy cow, right? Like this is somebody's, okay, me, it's my marks, it's my pride, etc. I was still getting a passing mark, but that sense of like trying and just not knowing what the heck was wrong, it meant a lot to me as a student. And that could have been a very, very discouraging year for me. Likewise, I mean, judges, right? Like that is so, so big. Whether this is people's whole lives, right? Like whether they're going back to jail, they're going back into the outside world. These are big decisions. Now, one of the cool things that the book I read talked about is that there are actually ways that you can kind of mitigate this effect just by adjusting the logistics. But that's actually not so much what we're going to be talking about today. Today, what we're going to be talking about is how this applies to you as an entrepreneur specifically. And, we're definitely going to touch on some ways that you can mitigate this. But why is this important? How can you become aware of it? Right? This is something that happens whether you like it or not. But if you can figure out ways to become more aware of this bias when it's happening, I personally think, this is my real talk, my say perspective or whatever, but I personally think that this is one of the most exciting and effective mitigating factors that you can leverage at your disposal is really just being aware of when it's happening, because that's when you can reach out for help. You can delegate, not just delegate decisions, but defer them, right, to when you're going to have more time and energy. Anyway, this comes up in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, because I know it's kind of cyclical when it happens less, what are some of the first signs you notice, or how do you identify when you're facing decision fatigue?
I would say for me, it's very feeling focused, in the sense that I have an immediate and visceral reaction to having to make a decision that is a negative one. Like my tummy kind of like tightens up, or my chest tightens up, and I'm like, oh. I think it's worthwhile to note that the kind of problems that decision fatigue can cause, they do include kind of poorer decision making, or kind of putting off making a decision. But for me, it just becomes straight up difficult to decide. And I think that the early warning sign, so if I'm faced with a decision, and my warning sign that I'm experiencing decision fatigue is definitely physical. But what I notice kind of throughout the day that helps me identify when I'm getting to this place is usually more along the lines of like small tweaky things. Like I'll get a message on Slack. It's still fairly emotional. But I'll get a message on Slack and I'll catch myself feeling resentful that someone was asking this or asking me this. And for me, that's like a whoa, because quite often it's not even a question that's being asked to me directly. It's just a question that's being asked that I may or may not have the answer to. But also for me, I would say it manifests the most strongly in non-business related things. And I know you and I were discussing this before, Celene, but over the years, I've overcome a lot of kind of struggles towards making decisions in the business. And I've learned that the effectiveness of the business basically relies on how quickly and effectively I can make decisions. So, we also have all these things in place that kind of help me make business decisions. But it might be my lunch break. And all of a sudden, I'm like, looking at my lunch and like feeling a little like stumped on whether to put it in like, I don't know, the toaster oven or the big oven or just eat it cold or something like that. Those little decisions, when those start to become more difficult, that's when I know that I'm heading quick. I'm heading quick to the decision fatigue pit. And that even though I may still have to make some decisions for the business that day, maybe it's a better idea to just ask for insight or help, or even sometimes just defer those decisions.
Mm-hmm. For me too, I tend, when I'm facing it, I notice I tend to just take the easy way out. Like, for example, what to make for dinner. I may have tons of food that I can easily cook up. I may have lots of time to do it, but instead of making a decision, I'll just get takeout if I've had like a long week or I just can't decide something.
Oh my gosh.
I'll scroll through Pinterest for like 10 or 15 minutes and look at all these amazing things that I could easily make because I'm pretty good at cooking, and I'll end up ordering pizza.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. Now, I live in a more rural area, so, going out to eat or getting takeout, or, we don't have like those delivery meals. For having a brain fart on what they're called. But like DoorDash, Dine to Door, Uber Eats, those kinds of things. Anyway, we don't have those kinds of things. But similar, I'm a great cook. And we have a number of things that are usually fairly simple to make, or I have simple taste. And I'll just open the fridge. Actually, this is a big one, just opening the fridge. Like if I've opened the fridge 3 times in the last 15 minutes.
Stared with glazed eyes.
Yeah. And it was like, oh God, there's nothing, and walk away. And then I'm like, wait. It's not that there's nothing. It's that I feel overwhelmed by the amount of decisions that I see inside the fridge, even if there's like simple stuff to make. So yeah, I'll usually end up defrosting something. I'll just be like, oh, okay, I'm going to defrost a meal. We do meal planning and stuff like that. So.
Well, that's always good. But yeah, when you plan ahead, it's not an issue to make dinner. Like a lot of people think that you order takeout because you're too tired or too busy to make dinner. But for me, like if I plan my meals ahead and I already have them listed out, it's no problem to put it together. It really is just that initial making the decision on what to cook, which should be easy. It should be simple. But sometimes it just isn't.
Yeah. Agreed. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about how to identify it, what sort of problems can it cause, and stuff like that. What are some of the things that you find that help you avoid decision fatigue throughout the day, Celene?
Yeah. So, I mean, for whatever reason, I don't seem to get it in business, for which I'm really grateful, probably because I put all my decision making, if you have a finite number of decisions that you can make comfortably, I pour that into business. So it's usually like my personal life where like you said, decision fatigue manifests. But one thing that I do is I'll flip a coin, or I'll pull up my phone and open a random number generator. Like one of the biggest things I was telling you this earlier is if what I'm going to order at a restaurant or dessert, like if it's like a cheesecake or a pie or something, I can sit and look at the menu for half an hour and I start getting stressed out. And I'll ask my husband, I'll be like, Jordan, what should I order for dessert? And he's like, I don't know. You're the one going to be eating it. And I'm like, no. And so, I'll kind of flip a coin or pull up it's usually a generator. I don't have coins on me ever. And I'll just be like, fine, I'll take this. And, sometimes I feel secretly disappointed by the result. And that's kind of when I know to choose the other one. And that's one I should have chosen. So that's kind of one of the things that I do. Another one.
Totally. I just want to kind of pause you and back you up there a moment, Celene. So super, super awesome to share kind of some stuff that once you're there. But I want to focus on, what happens that helps you avoid this throughout the day. Not just when you're feeling super decision fatigued, what do you do? I think a lot of people find themselves in a position, where they're like, oh God, I'm having a hard time making a decision. But, we were talking about early warning signs and stuff like that. So what are some of the things that you do throughout the day to protect yourself from decision fatigue at the end of the day?
I think one of the things that helps the very most, for me at least, is planning. If I know, at the beginning of my workday, what tasks I'm going to do, then I'm not, because this happened to me before where, I'd be like, oh, I have so much on my plate. What do I do? And then the day it finishes, I'm like, oh, I didn't do anything because I was so busy worrying about what to do. Is having kind of that plan in place, outside of work, I said I do meal planning. But, similar thing in business is making sure that when you're at the beginning of the day or after your break, when your decision-making capability is higher, that you kind of make all those decisions that you need to, while your brain is still willing to do them.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty interesting. So what I'm hearing is that at the beginning of the day, if you know that you have a big day ahead of you, you'll put some things in place. You'll decide what you're going to eat early in the day. So it's not something you have to run up against and potentially, face the takeout question at the end of the day.
Yeah. And, if we're on Slack, and this happens sometimes, people, as I'm talking about this, I'm realizing it probably is decision fatigue, even though I just said I don't get it in business.
Frankly, I wasn't going to say it. Well, I wasn't going to say anything right away, but when you're like, I don't get decision fatigue in business, I was like, oh, really?
Oh, I know. Now that I'm doing this self-reflection thing, one thing that actually does help is people ask me a question. And it won't, I'll just be like, I can't deal with that right now. If it's not time sensitive, this is an app dependent thing, but I turn on a Slack bot notification and I set it to either, 3 hours or whatever time after lunch is, or I'll set it to 9 a.m. the next morning. And then if I have a bunch of, I get I wake up and I get on Slack the next morning and I have a whole bunch of Slack bot notifications. I kind of bang through all my decisions or things right then while I'm still fresh too.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say probably that makes a lot of sense, and I definitely do something similar. Probably one of the most famous things that I hear bandied about in the business world all the time to reduce decision fatigue is the idea of somewhere between having one outfit and having a quote unquote capsule wardrobe. The idea being that just by having limited options in terms of what you wear, right? I believe the story is that like famous CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg,
Barack
Tim
Obama,
Cook,
I saw him on the list.
yeah, people like that, basically reduce the amount of things that, reduce the amount of options for what to wear, because they don't want to waste their kind of important business decision making or important decision making basically on the more simple things at the beginning of the day. So it sounds like almost the opposite of what you were describing, Celene, where you're like, well, I'm going to make the key decisions, or maybe no, it is the exact same thing where you just have different key decisions to make, right? Barack Obama probably doesn't care whether or not he's getting takeout that night to the same degree because it doesn't impact so many different factors. I don't know. I can't say what Barack Obama's thinking, but definitely what I have noticed and experienced is that, the amount of kind of like casual decisions earlier in the day that I can get rid of is really helpful for me. And this is one of those things where understanding, like if we're putting this back into a business context, right? Because just like Celene, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you don't believe that you're experiencing decision fatigue at work, you probably need to check yourself if you're in a leadership position in your own organization, because decision fatigue isn't always the inability to make decisions. It can be quite simply like the first example that we gave, poorer decision making. And if you're not aware of this tendency, you too could fall into the trap of making better decisions earlier in the day and, potentially more problematic or the quote unquote easier decision near the end of the day, or finding yourself, other forms that it might appear that you might not be aware of. One is conflict. I have had one in particular that was near the end of a day on Friday. And in fact, I was in Pacific time and I think they were on Eastern time. So there was even more, like it really was the end of the day Friday for them. And it was the only sales call I've ever had where the person basically started yelling at me. It was in some ways it was almost traumatic, honestly. I was just like, what just happened here? Because I have a flow, or I had a flow. I don't really do any sales or anything anymore. But I had a flow that I went through, and this person basically, from what I understand, this was a few years ago, basically I said that it was going to be a certain price if they wanted it on a certain timeline. We'd have to work through these things. And she just went from zero to screaming. Basically, or she worked herself up over the course of a minute, but she basically said that I was screwing her over and she couldn't believe this and all this different type of stuff. And I was so confused. And this was early enough on in my career that my immediate response was actually like placate. It was, oh my God, what did I do wrong? Why are you freaking out? All this different type of stuff, and really like tried to make it better. And it was one of those situations where, quite frankly, if you're in a call with someone and they start yelling, and it's a sales call, that's a red flag. That's definitely a red flag. And we were literally like, this was a late stage sales call. Like we were pulling the trigger, and I had never gotten this kind of emotional reaction, from anybody, but even from her, right? Like we'd met at least 3 or 4 times at this point. And I totally thought we were on the same page. We were totally aligned, etc. Now, I'm not saying that, every one of you, you have decision fatigue when you start yelling at 3 p.m. on a Friday or whatever. But that was the only thing that really made sense. I'll be honest, I thought back, this was also years ago, so it was closer to that experience in university or whatever, although still a few years out from that. But I realized that was the only thing that was really different, is that we had been meeting earlier in the day or earlier in the week, and this happened to be close to the end of the day on Fridays. And now I'm very, very careful about what I schedule close to the end of the day, especially what I schedule close to the end of the work week, especially who I'm talking to and what that looks like. Because I've seen similar things like with my dentist, with a whole bunch of different people, a whole bunch of different situations. And I don't think that it's that people just magically turn into a shitty person. It's like Cinderella, the clock strikes Thursday and people turn into a shitty person or something. But same thing, Christmas, right? Almost every single, like problematic project we've had where, somebody had an emotional reaction to something was right around Christmas. In fact, Christmas is well past now, and I just want to take a moment to be grateful that we didn't have any of those types of experiences this year. But it's one of those things where, the reason I'm saying this is actually not to vilify people or, to make you feel sorry for me because I got yelled at. I'm sure all of us have had a client basically like raise their voice and come close to that point. Hopefully, prospect not a client, but often it is once they're at that client stage. What I'm trying to say is that you may be suffering from decision fatigue and not even aware of it. If you're noticing an increased amount of tension in your interactions, don't forget just normal, plain old fatigue too, right? But decision fatigue is so tied to these other types of fatigue. And sometimes you can still feel energized in other ways and find that, there's a note of tension or people are pushing back on your decisions more than they usually do or things like that. I would say that's quite often a sign that you're experiencing this. Now, if we start to turn towards, those strategies to deal with it, like Celene said, as much as possible from what I've seen, plan for it. Plan for it. Instead of trying to deny or that it's going to happen to you or, instead of refusing to be vulnerable, this is something you can absolutely plan for. Now, those of us, and thankfully I'm no longer part of this us anymore, who do work in the like 50 or 60 plus hours range, if you're working crazy hours, just try and arrange those hours or those days so that you are doing the most effective work early in the morning. If you've ever heard the eat that frog analogy or read the book, that's the concept behind it, right? Do the most difficult thing earlier on in the day because you're going to be making the best decisions around it. I also, we talked about meal planning. I think the fact that both of us brought it up, I think it's really worthwhile to mention is if you are someone who eats lots of home cooked meals and you do a lot of your own cooking or you're participating in that, plan ahead. We make one decision every week for what our weekly meal is going to be. We make a whole bunch of portions of it. And when Eric and I are feeling frozen, it's like, I'm not sure what I'm going to eat. Like, maybe I've opened up the fridge 3 times, but I know that I can just yank that thing out of the freezer and have a meal that I love that's tasty. Maybe I'll have 2 to choose from if there's a few different built up. And then it's a choice between this and this. It's not like, oh, what am I going to make tonight?
Yeah, and it's an easier choice because you have that if you make the choice, you're not going to have to do all like the prep and the cooking and all that stuff and the grocery shopping.
Absolutely. I would even say that a large part of the planning that it's important to do, again, if we're bringing it back to like your workday, understanding what your role is in the business, even if you have more than one role, I think has been really, really critical to this for me, because that allows you to say no to decisions that aren't your decision. Not saying no, just answering the question with no, but answering the question with, why don't you ask this person, or I'll let this person take this on.
Sometimes just sending it right back to the person and say, like instead of coming to me with the decision, how about, I trust you to come up with the decision and present it to me, which is something you do like on a weekly basis, at least maybe daily.
Totally. We've also created a culture in our team of coming prepared with solutions. We've created a culture where when people come to us with problems, like most of the time, and both of us fall into this trap, they're coming to us sometimes it's a question that just needs an answer, but if someone on our team is coming to us with a problem, we have them relegate it to an issues list of some kind where then we can discuss it in a space where we've set aside time and mental energy for making those kinds of decisions.
I feel like the issues list is the meal planning of like our business.
That's a great
we batch our decision making, and like it's we batch it basically.
Yeah, and a lot of decisions that feel confusing or overwhelming, tabling them to an issues list. And, we've talked about this in other calls, but basically the way that we tackle these issues lists is we have an IDS is the traction approved method. We have an IDDS, I think it is. It's like identify, data, decide, data, solve. But what we're doing is we're really just picking the top important things on the list. We're not even like the first thing we do is decide which things to talk about. And that one extra decision actually means that we're spending our energy in the most valuable place for the business at that time when we've set aside that time.
Yeah.
It's also a great way to make meetings productive. If you're
And we're also, I feel like you get in the habit of being mentally prepared to coming to make decisions in that one like hour period, as opposed to making them all throughout the week.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to be totally real here. Just because you've set aside the time for that meeting does not mean that you are necessarily going to be in that mental space. So a huge, huge part of dealing with decision fatigue, in my, personal opinion, is being vulnerable. Being willing. Sometimes the hardest part of this whole rigmarole is just showing up. Like the thing that like, I say the word rigmarole, which is something that, we potentially have negative associations with. And maybe that's a tell of my own fatigue for the day. But like sometimes we show up to a meeting and we look at the issues that are there and we prioritize them. And I'll look at one and I'll just be like, I'll be honest, I don't think that I have the mental or emotional energy to talk about that right now. And it's important to me to make sure that that's not just a cop-out answer in the sense of, I don't really want to talk about it because it's hard. But the fact is that a lot of the time, most of the time when I'm bringing that up, it is the truth. And if we were to push forward and make those decisions, oh my gosh, like even though, I mean, sometimes things are really time sensitive and need to be talked about that day, but even just checking your decision the next day or the next morning when you feel good, when you feel clear, that way you maybe don't have to put as much decision power towards it. But I have definitely said, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't know if I can deal with this right now. And having compassion on both sides when somebody comes to you and says something like that, and acknowledging that it's hard to be vulnerable and that it's important to listen when someone is saying this stuff to you like that. I would say that's really meaningful for me.
So true. And I mean, this is something that you've heard me say many times before, and spoiler alert, I'll probably say it again at some point. But, as an entrepreneur, your mental health and your mental energy is not worth pushing forward and wasting on one little thing, especially if it's not going to like burn your business to the ground one way or another. Because if you push yourself to try and make those decisions or solve that issue when you're already feeling taxed and overwhelmed, it can like put a funk on your whole week and end up having like worse consequences for your business. Yeah. I mean, other than the fact that, obviously you want to be happy and in a better place and have more energy. Like if we're just talking about strictly business, actually pushing yourself to make decisions and to deal with these things when you're not in a space for it can have consequences on your business too.
Absolutely. I mean, even the story that I started out by sharing, when I was back in that first year of university and when my mark jumped from, I don't know, like it's so funny because now marks just don't have the same weight that they did. But, like back then, like when my mark jumped from like 60 something to like an 80, you would think that I would have been stoked. Right? You'd think I'd be like, yes, I finally did it. Yes, etc. But the reality is that I actually felt kind of cheated because even though on paper my results were better, i.e., I had gotten that better mark that I wanted, the reality is that I wasn't there for the marks. I was honestly an apathetic at best high school student. And the only reason that I went a lot harder in university and stopped with all the procrastinating and stuff like that was because it was being paid for by my band. I'm Native, for those of you who don't know. or sorry, actually, I realize now that that might not make sense for people who are outside of Canada. But here in Canada, often people who have Native American descent, depending on their band, they have certain resources available to them. Like the band will cover your tuition, which is what happened to me. And so I actually was just like, oh my God, I can't fail these people because I won't get this money again and all this different type of stuff. So I really put my heart and soul into it. And what I really wanted to do wasn't to get good marks. It was to learn. I wanted to improve and to learn and get better in my skills. And realizing that my mark was dependent on the professor's mood, basically, even understanding at that time, I didn't even frankly have a huge blame for her because I was like, right, she's tired. I can see it. She's exhausted. She's not even aware that she's doing this. But it would have meant so much more to me for her to potentially acknowledge that or to work towards ways to alleviate that rather than to just get the good mark. So, of course, I'm going to relate this back to business because I'm a super nerd and that's everything that I do. In the same sense, right? Like, whenever you can, reserve your best decision-making time for the stuff that is most important to your role. So that means that, you know, if you're the one who's leading projects and doing projects and meeting with clients and doing a lot of client meetings, unless it's a necessity, I highly, highly recommend putting those times in places where you're going to feel energized and be able to help them make great decisions. And if you're having meetings and going through stuff at times where you're not in the best state of mind, defer those decisions if you can. Be like, okay, you know, a really great example of this is like a deep dive type situation where it's like, okay, you know, maybe you're doing some sort of discovery. You're like, sweet, I have gotten so much valuable stuff out of this. I'm just going to take some time and sit with it and come back to it. But if you're consistently pushing, you know, all of the work for that client to times where you're not at your best, you're tired, you know, you're just like grinding through. Sometimes if you're an overachiever like me or Celene, you know, it can be tempting to say, well, okay, I did it. I got it done. I met the deadline. I made the meeting, etc. That's amazing. And I'm not saying at all that you should like miss deadlines and meetings willy-nilly. That's not what I'm saying. But if you have a meeting booked where you're going to have to make, like, I'll just give an example. I have a consulting call booked for later this week that, you know, when I first looked at it, I was like, okay, cool, that'll be good, but it's a consulting call. I'm going to need to make decisions on the spot and to give good guidance and to really be present and to be at my best in order to deliver maximum value. So here we are. It's Monday. I'm looking at this Friday call and realizing that I have so much other stuff going on at that time. And could I make it work? Yeah. But will I be at my best? I'm, you know, closer. It's Friday, you know, lots of stuff going on, busy week just after the holidays, etc. Maybe not. You know, I made the call to reach out to that person and ask if we could reschedule. And, you know, I haven't gotten a response back. Hopefully, you know, it'll be a positive one. But for me, making that decision, looking at that again when I'm in a clear-headed space, and deciding that and reaching out, even if she says, no, you know, that really is the only time that works for me. You know, and I was candid to her. I was just like, you know, I don't think I'm going to be at my best for this meeting. I want to give you my best. Could we maybe look at this time or this time or this time? And just so you know, I'm adjusting my calendar so that this doesn't happen again for the next person. Like, even if she comes back and says, oh, no, that's the only time that works for me, I'd like to do it, etc. The fact that I advocated for my own needs in order to deliver the best service possible for my role, once again, that has so much power. That has so much power for me, right? Instead of what I might have done in the past, which is really not even looking at my calendar more than a day or two ahead, or looking at that day and being like, oh my God, that's going to be a crazy busy day. I don't know how I'm going to handle it. I'm just going to have to grin and bear it or push through. And then maybe Thursday comes along. Now the exhaustion is really hitting me. I'm looking at my Friday calendar and I'm like, oh crap. Or worse yet, Friday morning. And now I'm like, okay, now if I message her and ask to reschedule, oh, it's not going to look super good. good. It's like last minute kind of a thing. Like, oh, I guess I'm just going to do it. I just going to push through, etc. Right? It's not saying that like you always need to reschedule something if it's not like in the time that is your best. But just again, relating it back to that story, what your clients and what your team, what the people in your life, your business life are looking for from you is usually the thing that you have to offer, like the best thing that you have to offer. If your life is relatively aligned, if your business is relatively aligned, with your skills and passions and et cetera, then they're not looking for you to like eke out a moment of exhausted, make it work with them. Again, sometimes that's what it has to be, and that's okay. Likewise, the people in my life, at the end of the day, when I'm struggling with decisions, the two closest men to me in my life, one of them, well, Eric and I have been spending a lot of time together for almost a decade now. So he knows probably better than I do when I get a certain look in my eye. He won't even ask, like he's been prepped. Like he won't even ask me questions, right? He'll just make decisions. Because what he's expressed is that it's more important for him to be with me, and being able to be present and being able to participate and et cetera, than it is for me to kind of push through and make those arbitrary decisions just because. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I've rambled all over the place a little bit here, but, just wanted to finish that up with, meanwhile, this other man that I spend so much time with, it's a little bit newer to him. So he doesn't understand why, for so much of the day, I'm just like, bam, 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 this, yes, that, yes. And then at one point I just basically turn into like a shy shifting child where I'm like, I don't know. He's like, well, do you want to go for a walk now or in half an hour? I'm like, I don't know. And I almost start to freak out. And he's really confused. And it's been really, really important for me to be able to advocate for my own needs. That doesn't necessarily mean pushing yourself through and making the decision. It means having a talk with him again when I'm like fresher and like in that space of confidence, being like, okay, I really struggled to make decisions at the end of the day. It's causing me a lot of stress. What are some things that we can do to mitigate that? What are some ways that you can help support me with that?
Yeah, I think that's a really big one, is reaching out to people and, like you mentioned, being vulnerable and being honest and asking for help. And when you can, getting other people to make decisions for you, if it's appropriate and not going to like have negative consequences.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, and Celene and I have both hinted at this, is that the decisions that you make for your business, especially as you step more and more, like what I want for you is hopefully what you want for you, but definitely to step into being the leader that you desire to be, whatever that looks like. Step into the role that you desire to have in your digital agency, whatever that looks like, whether it's a solopreneur, whether it's, making the high level visionary decisions. But what I found is that in order to make those decisions, and you do have to make those decisions, those are not decisions that can be delayed indefinitely most of the time. The high-level leadership decisions for your business, like those are important. Being able to make the right decisions is really what will move you and your business forward. But you're going to make a lot more decisions than just those ones. So it comes down to a few different things. This is, again, with yourself and your own business. We're going to touch a little bit onto what to do, recognizing with it and helping clients through it. Definitely one key aspect of it is figuring out which decisions. I know we talked about this a little bit already. Which decisions are yours to make? If you are the amazing go-getter superstar that you probably are, then there's a lot of decisions you can make. But what are the decisions you should make? Now, for me, a lot of people know that my role as a leader has grown and changed a lot over the last few years. And one of the things that's happened is that I've been forced to, not forced, but the thing that really my business needs and the thing that I need as a human being, the thing that my team needs is exactly this, for me to know when to step in and make the decisions and know. That's not to say that the decisions that I would make when I'm kind of playing a little game of tennis and lobbing them back to the team wouldn't be good. Not even to say that sometimes they wouldn't be better, But the critical element is that they deplete my decision-making capacity for the higher level decisions that are more important. Now, I also had the reverse problem where sometimes I would feel almost guilty pushing forward with a decision that I'd made that I absolutely knew was kind of critical to keep the team on board. I'd be like, well, no, I'm letting them make their own decisions. I want to empower them in that. I don't want to deplete my decision making. But it's like, no, no, no. My role within the business is not a production role. It is not even a management role. It is a leadership and high-level decision-making role. So I make a lot fewer decisions, but they're bigger decisions. And I need to have the energy and capacity to gauge the decisions that my team is making and nudge them back on track when it's appropriate. So with that in mind, it is actually critical that I say no to the easier, lower level decisions, and just say, I'm going to let somebody else answer that, or here's some data, what would you think the answer is? I can give you some feedback on that, or et cetera. Because it's critical for me to align myself to make those other decisions. But earlier on in the business, it was the opposite. Those high level business decisions were less important because I just needed to pick something and keep going, right? Like if you're just getting started, I would say that decision paralysis is actually more important and more dangerous than just decision fatigue, right? Because you have some of these questions that are so big and might change the whole life of your business. Like, oh, I don't know, what niche should you pick? Being probably the most famous one, at least in our industry, that I hear a lot. But the reality is, and if you are facing that, or this isn't something you've come up against in training before, then some of you probably know that making a decision to pick a niche and just going for it for 30 or 60 or 90 days, whatever amount of leeway you give yourself, is more important than being paralyzed forever on that decision. Because as long as you're paralyzed in a decision, you're not going to move forward at all. But if you make the wrong decision, then you'll usually know pretty quick and be able to course correct. This is just, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't kind of forget about that little aspect of things, is that I really, really find that the key to recognizing it and dealing with it in yourself and making good decisions is understanding which decisions are yours to make and which decisions are not. Because in the end, it's my business. And that doesn't mean that, I make every decision, but it's my business. My role is the visionary, etc. Even though I might sometimes feel guilty being like, no, this is a decision I made. We really need to stick to it and push forward. Again, properly contextualize, those are the decisions I need to be making right now.
Yeah. And I've actually found too, because this is something that we both constantly practice and have to get used to, is that habit of giving up decisions. Is the more that I'm able, this applies to people with teams, but the more I'm able to hand off decisions to others, and not only force them to make their own decisions and choices, but empower them in it, they get not only do they get better at decision making, but they also have more confidence in their role because they feel like they have the power there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that one illusion, if we're on the real talk vibe, I thought that as I moved up the kind of leadership ladder, I would make fewer decisions. But, to some degree that is technically true, but I would say it's more accurately the type of decisions that I make has changed significantly. So now I make fewer higher level decisions, but I'm doing more design style decisions, how are we designing an overall effective business and experience for the clients rather than really just moving forward. All right. So some of the things that we have, just to do a kind of a quick recap. So we've talked about ways to identify decision fatigue in ourselves. We've talked about ways to identify things you can do ahead of time to alleviate decision fatigue. We've talked about some stuff to do when you're in the midst of decision fatigue, specifically delay, defer, with decide as the last option, get some help deciding. But business decisions are usually important enough that flipping a coin, well, I don't know. Honestly, like if you are, so I will just say this right now. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you are stuck on your niche and don't know which niche you want to go into, flip a coin. Just flip a coin. As Celene said, if you get one side and you're like, oh crap, is that what I got? Then choose the other one. Go with that. But once again, some decisions, especially earlier on, are better to just make and go forward, especially if you're in a state of near constant decision fatigue, and then create a habit of looking back on those decisions and making new ones. Again, when you're in a better state. But as you get further along in your business and you are making higher and higher level decisions, which have the capacity to negatively impact your team and your business in the short term very quickly, there is no freaking shame in delaying it until the next day, deferring it. Sorry, that I would say delaying it can be a little bit dangerous because you don't want to delay forever, but you could defer it to a specific other time that you've already set, like maybe the next morning or something. Or get somebody else to give you feedback on the decision, or delegate the decision if appropriate.
Yeah, because definitely if, delaying versus deferring, I think that you brought up is an important distinction, because if you're constantly delaying a whole bunch of decisions, what's going to happen is future you is going to have this whole heap of decisions, and it's just going to snowball your decision fatigue. I know I mentioned to you an article that I read about having, like, how people don't have empathy for their future selves, so that's why they procrastinate tasks onto their future selves. But this is so true for, decision making too. If you just, like, without any kind of regard or intention, just heap a whole bunch of decisions to future you is going to have decision fatigue and be just as overwhelmed, if not more overwhelmed, than current you.
Yeah. So where does this leave you, right? Well, we've talked about understanding your role within your company so that you understand, which decisions are yours, which decisions to delegate. So hopefully you're not having to do that once you're in decision fatigue. You can start playing that old game of tennis or badminton and lobbing decisions back at people. But also we've talked about, if you have a team, how can you get them to support you? Right? Having them come to you with a solution, letting them know, and being vulnerable. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be vulnerable sometimes with your team, with your clients, etc. But also just evaluating regularly, setting aside, I would say this is actually two different things. So one is setting aside, we talked about this as well, setting aside time where based on your kind of physical, mental, and emotional cycles, when you're going to be at your best, right? Like quarterly planning, for example. We set that at a time where we had just had our last one, right? Which was over the Christmas break or over the holiday break. We set it for a time where we had just gotten some break time and some relaxed time. It was right after the weekend, so that we had our most clear-headed and top energy available for that. But it's also important to just evaluate regularly, right? There's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's no magical fix. Decision fatigue is real. If you don't think you're experiencing it, you are probably fooling yourself. And this is speaking as someone who now works in the kind of 20-hour-a-week range and focuses almost entirely on high-level decision-making. I still hit decision fatigue almost as much as I ever have because there's still lots of decisions to make. There's just higher-level decisions, all very, very, very powerful ways to address it. Now, this isn't the end of the story, though. The second part that we were going to cover in this episode, but I think that we honestly have enough material and it's separate enough. We don't want to confuse and overwhelm you, right? This is a lot to digest. Maybe this is stuff you've already been thinking about. Maybe this is stuff you've been working on for a while. Maybe it's all totally new to you. Maybe you're like, well, decision fatigue. I don't know. That sounds like some crazy stuff.
Spend the next week thinking about it and see if you recognize the signs.
Yeah, please do. We also want to hear from you, right? We want to hear, what are your signs of decision fatigue? Did we miss anything? How do you approach it when you're in it? How do you stop it from approaching so quickly, right? How do you manage the finite resource that you've been given? Once again, if you have not read The One Thing, and this is a topic that interests you, highly, highly, highly recommend it. If you are hearing things like be vulnerable and be real and, say that you're not okay, or if you're not okay, and that terrifies you, or you feel ashamed, or you feel resentful or resistant, highly recommend pretty much any of Brene Brown's work. Most recently, I was introduced to The Power of Vulnerability, which is audiobook only, I believe. Really powerful. But anyway, there is a whole other side of this that we have not touched on today. And we are going to talk about it in our next episode. So that is specifically recognizing decision fatigue and dealing with it in clients. This has two aspects to it, right? One of them is, just navigating those situations where potentially someone who was always super chill and awesome is like suddenly like yelling or crying or weird or something, and you're not sure how to handle it. But also, and I'm just like grinning as I say this because I think this is awesome. I think this is one of our secret weapons, but also something that, I still work on and sometimes struggle with every day, is how to help alleviate your client's decision fatigue, right? Like if you are a service provider, especially if you are a subcontractor like we are, but just any way that you are providing a service, right? You're providing value, you are solving a problem. If you are dealing with business owners, which most of us are, decision fatigue is a really huge issue. And it's not just about, okay, what kinds of like Band-Aids or supports or et cetera can we set up? If you can be aware of, sensitive to, and plan around and for, not just around, but plan for the decision fatigue in your clients, then you can help them so much. You don't even have to have a conversation with them about decision fatigue. It doesn't have to be a whole kind of like point of pride or like point of conflict, but you can do a lot to take decisions off their plate in a way that they feel comfortable with, where they're still safe and in control. And this is one of the most magical things that you can do to catapult yourself from a mere service provider to a trusted specialist, a trusted expert. Just really great stuff. So we're going to be digging into that as its own whole episode and whole topic. Stay tuned for the next episode of Digital Agency Real Talk. I'm really excited about it.
I can't wait.
Now, is there anything on the topic of decision fatigue in yourself and your team that maybe I missed or you wanted to touch on or dig into, Celene?
I think we really covered quite a range of kind of aspects of decision fatigue and how it affects us both personally and professionally.
Awesome.
I can't think of anything.
Awesome. So I turn the question over to you, our audience, our lovely listeners, right? So let us know. Did we mess something up? Did we miss something? We definitely want to hear. And if this episode was helpful for you at all, please just let us know. Even just a few words, again, the usual ones are iTunes, but wherever, or I guess Apple Music is what it is now, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, Stitcher, things like that. We just love to know. We are really trying to align these topics and these episodes with what we're hearing from you guys. Things that either we struggle with that we hear back, oh my God, me too. Oh my God, me too. Things that, people are like, wow, it really baffles us how you do this thing. Could you talk about it? Like, we are totally open to suggestions going forward, and we genuinely want to know whether this was relevant and helpful for you. So, as usual, thanks for listening and thanks for tuning in. This has just been absolutely lovely. I hope that each and every one of you has an absolutely fantastic day. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.